The autumn of 1941 was unusually cold. Morning fog drifted slowly over the railway station, turning it into something almost ghost-like. Trains arrived and departed without unnecessary noise. The war had long since taught people not to ask too many questions. On the platform stood a young communications lieutenant, Alexei Morozov. He was only 23, and just a year earlier, he had been teaching physics at a school. He loved precise sciences, dreamed of returning to teaching someday, and believed that knowledge could change the world. But now, his world consisted of field cables, radiograms, and orders that could not be questioned. That day, he was handed a sealed envelope. Deliver it personally. No intermediaries, the captain said briefly. How urgent is it? The captain looked him straight in the eyes. Urgent enough that it matters far more than you think. Alexei didn't ask any more questions. In wartime, urgency wasn't measured in words, you could hear it in a person's voice. A road without the right to make a mistake. He had to reach headquarters, located nearly 100 kilometers from the station. Normally, such documents were transmitted through secure communications, but the lines were regularly damaged, sometimes because of weather, sometimes for other reasons. So the most important messages were still entrusted to people. The truck carrying the group of signalers rattled violently along the broken road. It was cold in the back, but no one complained. Each was lost in their own thoughts. Alexei carefully touched the inner pocket of his coat. The envelope was still there. He didn't know what was inside, but he understood one thing. If an order was being sent this way, the usual methods were no longer reliable. Several hours later, the truck stopped. We can't go any farther, the driver said. The bridge is destroyed. We'll have to go around. The detour meant an extra 20 kilometers on foot. Alexei adjusted the strap of his bag and stepped onto the road. A silence that felt wrong. The forest looked calm, too calm. There was no wind, no familiar sounds. Even the birds seemed to have disappeared for a while. Experienced soldiers used to say, when everything becomes too quiet, it's time to be especially alert. Alexei walked quickly, trying not to lose the path. He mentally repeated the route he had been shown on the map. After about an hour, he noticed a severed communication cable. The dark line of wire stretched along the roadside and vanished into the bushes. He stopped. If the cable was damaged, headquarters might be left without communication. According to instructions, he could have walked past it. His task was to deliver the envelope, but the former teacher within him wouldn't allow him to simply ignore the problem. He pulled out his tools and began searching for the break. The damage was worse than he expected. Someone had clearly cut the line. It was no accident. Alexei quickly reconnected the wire as best as conditions allowed. It took nearly 40 minutes. 40 minutes he didn't have. An unexpected encounter. As he prepared to continue his journey, an elderly man in a worn coat stepped out from behind the trees. A signaler? The man asked quietly. Alexei grew cautious. Yes. And who are you? A caretaker from the local station. Or at least I used to be. Now, I must help however I can. The man pointed at the cable. Good thing you fixed it. The connection here often disappears. He paused, then added, today, it's especially important that it works. Alexei felt something tighten inside him. Why? The old man glanced toward the road. A column is supposed to pass through this area tonight. If they don't receive the signal in time, they might turn the wrong way. In wartime, even a small routing mistake could cost dearly. Alexei realized the delay might not have been pointless after all. He thanked the man and quickened his pace, racing against time. By evening, a light rain began to fall. The road grew slippery, his boots heavier with mud. Fatigue was building, but stopping was not an option. When the lights of headquarters finally appeared in the distance, he felt almost physical relief. A sentry stopped him at the entrance. Documents. Alexei silently handed over the envelope. Within a minute, he was being led to command. The colonel opened the packet immediately. He read it quickly, then again more slowly. When did you leave? He asked. This morning. Did you see the communication line on your way? Yes, it was damaged. I restored it. For the first time in the conversation, the colonel allowed himself a faint smile. Then everything worked. Later, Alexei was told, that the envelope contained an urgent order to change the route of a large unit. If the message had arrived late, the column could have ended up in an extremely dangerous area, and the restored communication line made it possible to confirm the order and avoid confusion. A night that made things clear. Alexei stepped outside. The rain had stopped, and stars were beginning to push through the clouds. Suddenly, he understood something simple. In war, there are no small tasks. A repaired wire, a document delivered on time, an extra 40 minutes on the road. Sometimes great history is built from details like these. The same captain who had handed him the envelope that morning approached. Tired? A little. The captain nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow, there's more work. He was about to leave, but then stopped. Do you know why we trusted you with this? Alexei shook his head. We were told you were a teacher before the army. People like that usually understand the value of responsibility. Years later, after the war, Alexei truly did return to teaching. Sometimes his students would ask, "Were you afraid?" He always answered honestly, "Of course. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to do what must be done despite it." He rarely spoke about that mission, not because he wanted to forget, quite the opposite. He simply believed that in those years, thousands of people performed acts no one would ever hear about. And it was precisely through such quiet efforts that the world slowly returned to peaceful life. The letter he never expected. Many years passed before Alexei thought again about that autumn mission. Life had gradually settled into something resembling normalcy. Mornings filled with lectures, chalk dust on his sleeves, the low murmur of students solving equations. He found comfort in predictability, something war had once taken from everyone. One quiet afternoon, as golden light spilled across the classroom windows, the school secretary knocked softly on the door. "Alexei Ivanovich, there's a letter for you." He rarely received personal mail at work. Most people who had known him during the war had long since moved away, started new lives, or simply preferred not to look back. The envelope was plain. No return address, only his name, and carefully, almost thoughtfully. He opened it after the last lesson ended. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You don't know me," the letter began, "but many years ago, you helped save my father." Alexei sat down slowly. The classroom was silent now, but suddenly, it felt as though time itself had paused. A decision that echoed through time. The letter explained that on the very night Alexei repaired the communication line, a transport column had been redirected. Among the soldiers traveling in that column was a young mechanic named Pavel Sokolov. If the route had not been changed, they would have driven straight into a rapidly shifting front line. Instead, they were turned south. Pavel survived the war. He returned home, built a house, planted an orchard, raised 3 children. One of them had written the letter. Alexei read the lines twice, then a third time, not out of disbelief, but because the human mind sometimes needs repetition to fully grasp the weight of something unseen. All those years, he had remembered the mission as a small episode. Important, yes, but still just one thread in a vast tapestry of events. Now, he understood something remarkable. We rarely learn the consequences of the choices we make under pressure. The mathematics of fate. As a physics teacher, Alexei often told his students that the universe runs on chains of cause and effect. Push one object, another begins to move. Change a variable, the entire equation transforms. But life was far more complex than any formula. What were the odds, he wondered, that 40 minutes spent repairing a cable would ripple forward into decades of someone else's life? He imagined the orchard mentioned in the letter, spring blossoms, children running between the trees, laughter carried by warm wind, entire seasons of life all quietly dependent on a decision made beside a silent forest road. History books usually speak in enormous terms, divisions, strategies, turning points. Yet history is also deeply personal. Sometimes it is measured not in maps, but in birthdays that were able to happen. A journey back. The letter ended with an invitation. The writer explained that their family still lived near the same region and would be honored if Alexei ever visited. For weeks, he kept the letter folded inside a book on his desk. At first, he wasn't sure whether to go. Revisiting the past requires a certain courage, a willingness to reopen doors long closed. But curiosity, gentle and persistent, eventually won. When spring arrived, he boarded a train heading west. The countryside rolled past the window, rivers freed from winter ice, dark soil ready for planting, villages slowly waking after the cold months. So much had changed, and yet, strangely, the horizon looked exactly as it always had. The orchard. The house was easy to find. Behind it stretched rows of apple trees just beginning to bloom. A man in his 30s stepped forward to greet him. "You must be Alexei Ivanovich." There was warmth in his voice, the kind reserved for someone already considered part of the story. "My name is Mikhail," he said. "Pavel was my father." They walked through the orchard together. "My father rarely spoke about the war," Mikhail explained, "but he always said that once, at a critical moment, someone he would never meet helped change his path." He stopped beside a tree thicker than the rest. This was the first one he planted after returning home. Alexei rested his hand lightly against the bark. Solid, alive, enduring. "How many trees are here?" he asked. 52, Mikhail replied with a smile. "One for every peaceful year he was given." The number lingered in the air. 52 years, all flowing from a repaired wire and a delivered envelope. The quiet legacy. Inside the house hung photographs spanning decades: weddings, school uniforms, summer gatherings, ordinary moments. Yet Alexei found them extraordinary. War is often remembered for destruction, but its lesser-told story is preservation. The lives that continued. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the fields, Mikhail brought out a small wooden box. "My father wanted you to have this, if we ever found you." Inside lay an old compass, scratched, weathered, still functional. "He carried it throughout the war," Mikhail said. "He believed that as long as you know your direction, you can endure almost anything." Alexei turned the compass in his hand. The needle trembled slightly, then settled, unwavering, toward north. "What we leave behind." On the train home, Alexei watched twilight merge softly into night. He thought about his students, the way they sometimes worried that their actions were too small to matter. He knew now how wrong that fear could be. Most people never see the full reach of their influence. A kind word, a responsible choice, a moment of integrity. Like signals traveling outward, their effects continue long after we've forgotten them. Years later, during one of his lectures, a student asked a familiar question: can one person really make a difference in something as large as history? Alexei paused before answering. "Yes," he said quietly. "History is not only shaped by famous names. It is built from millions of decisions made by ordinary people who chose to do their duty, even when no one was watching." He did not mention the forest road, or the cable, or the orchard of 52 trees. Some stories don't need to be spoken aloud to remain true. The lesson he carried forward. On the last page of his teaching notebook, Alexei later wrote a single line for himself: "Responsibility is the invisible force that connects our actions to the future." He closed the notebook and looked out at the classroom, bright, alive, full of possibility. The world moves forward not only because of grand victories, but because, time after time, someone chooses to stop, repair the broken line, and continue the journey. And often, they never realize how far the signal travels.